We are live.
All right. Excellent. Here we are.
I was born in it.
We're live. Hey, this is the week before Thanksgiving.
It is.
So I was just thinking about this. We haven't even talked about this, but next week we probably won't have a show.
That is true.
Because we're probably,
4 sheets to the wind.
yeah.
3 sheets to the
3
wind.
sheets. First, that means drunk.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. What
do you think that means?
I don't drink, so I don't know.
Well, why would you use that phrase then?
3 sheets to the wind, meaning 3 sheets gone.
4, 5, 6.
It's a reference to drunk.
Oh, I
Yeah.
know. I don't. Leroy Hill doesn't drink, so
All right. Did you fall off the wagon?
My wife,
I've never fallen
The
on
reason
the wagon. I've never been on the wagon.
the funny thing about this, my wife used to always say when we got married, like, her mom said, oh, when somebody's tired, they say, oh, 3 sheets to the wind. I'm like, you realize what that means?
No,
She grew up, her mom always said that. And so I was like, no,
Okay.
that's not what that means. In the Urban Dictionary, look, I show up
There
with
it
sources,
is.
TV references. Does not mean tired.
It does not mean tired.
So her whole life, she was a tip, oh, I'm 3 sheets to the wind,
Child services is being called.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody keeps showing up.
I didn't even know that.
I'm not
See
sure
that?
why. Yeah, she keeps saying her children are 3 sheets to the wind. DHS. What the hell?
That's right.
Oh,
Keep getting called.
I
We haven't
didn't-
caught her.
I didn't even know that. That's pretty interesting. So that means drunk, huh?
Yeah. I'll tell my wife that she's not the only one that apparently doesn't know what common colloquial phrases mean.
Well, it can be like the area you're in, So
There might be some,
so like
but I've never.
I used to call beverages like pop, like soda pop.
Oh
pop.
yeah,
They call it soda. We would call it pop.
some
Almost a
people call
pop.
it soda
Yeah.
pop.
Right. Some soda pop.
Funny story about that one. So when I was in I think a freshman, no, maybe a sophomore at Penn State, we had an exchange program through our engineering deal with University of Leeds. So they'd send over a bunch of their engineering people. We send over a bunch of ours, that kind of stuff. So these Leeds students are in the room, and one of the guys, we're in class getting ready, and he leans up to one of the girls that's in our room. He said, pardon me, do you have a rubber? And so she gets saucer-eyed. She looks at him like, what did you just ask me for? He's like, when you make a mistake on a paper, erase the mistake. He said, oh, see, in America we call that an eraser.
Right.
Rubber means something else.
Something
and,
different. That's
so I was
right.
asking for a condom, and that was some sort of like
That would be really bad.
some sort of like a saucy approach to her. She's like, no, I just meant to erase. So it was
Did
funny.
this just jump to PG-13 here?
Well, we get blocked by Google anyway, so our show is rated that way. Is not appropriate for mine.
Wow.
So.
All right. Yeah, so it's all right.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Hey, look on the TV in the back. There's Leroy's picture.
Yes.
Isn't that nice?
Oh,
It's
man.
in the background.
That's a
He and his
handsome picture.
wife. That's awesome. That's a good picture.
That's a handsome
They're
picture.
running on
Where'd
Facebook.
you get the tape that?
Vista, California.
All right. I like it.
Actually, we got that taken just before we went to the Midwest. What a big mistake that was.
In the Midwest.
The Midwest. Technically, it wasn't a big mistake. It was it was a very interesting season in our life. We met some good people.
Yeah.
That part,
Midwest has some of the nicest people,
Nice-
at least when they're not in their cars, that you'll ever want to meet.
one of my favorite people.
Almost got fallen off the wagon.
No,
Yeah.
one of my favorite people from the Midwest. Actually, it's a very interesting story. So the guy who
It better be, because we're live.
the guy we went to go serve under in the Midwest, his great grandfather is the guy who actually was at war with Joseph Smith.
Oh, really?
Literally was the newspaper man who fomented the mob who marched to Carthage.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
That shot Joseph Smith in jail?
The
That's the one?
the one who fomented the mob.
Right.
He wasn't a part of it.
No. Oh,
Yeah,
But the
he
ones
was
who
sort
actually
of
went
the
to
mob,
the
yeah.
mob,
The mob that went there and shot.
and that was, and listen, that's not they must have been really
So
mad
actually, the
because
power of newspaper
Newspaper.
reporters to create violent mobs.
they weren't. Listen, they must have
So
been.
it's not there.
They must have been mad because that is no small jaunt.
Yeah, wow.
And they walked,
Especially, I was going to say.
they walked from Warsaw to Carthage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not enough time to keep them out with a wall.
Which Warsaw?
Warsaw, Illinois.
Thank you.
Warsaw, Illinois. They marched from there to Carthage, and
Wow.
Mm.
How far was
That's
that?
I think it's about 20 miles.
Yeah, people coming from Honduras.
Exactly. But But yeah, so the ancestral homeland for Mormonism is in a place called Nauvoo, which is again it's a nice drive. It's a beautiful drive. But the Mormons are always in the town, and they have a natural disdain. We
cannot edit that out. I am sorry.
That is it. They have a natural disdain.
This is live, and that was frightening to many of you.
Yes.
Wow.
Did not mean to offend or scare any children out there.
If anybody in the future wants to show this show at all to like retirement communities where there might be elderly, we may need to accompany it with a warning.
That's right.
Just.
Well, what's interesting is that the Mormons would come down from Nauvoo because they still train their deacons and elders there. They would come into Warsaw, and they literally still hold disdain for the city for what happened.
But yet they still do their stuff there.
And yet they still do their stuff there. And that's another story. But it's just a very interesting dynamic. But boy, that was a very interesting time.
So we have a couple options for the show today. That's a much more interesting story, by the way, than the witches in Hollywood one. Just want to say, no, you're on your way up. So
no, but you know what's really interesting?
That was actually interesting.
Thank you for bringing the witches in Hollywood.
Oh my God.
No, we don't have to. But here's the deal. My whole goal in bringing it up is to make sure that it doesn't die every week.
And you didn't bring it up.
I didn't have to. He did.
Yeah. You're welcome. So we have a couple directions we could go.
Other than episode 1.
That will be actually interesting.
You should go back and watch episode 1. It is very...
And vote, because it was Leroy's story.
Sure, absolutely.
These guys don't have a sense of humor.
Okay, all right.
So we could go direction talking about atheist pastors.
Let's talk about that one.
Let's talk about
that
one.
Let me
just give a couple options. We could talk about the sort of intellectual problems in academics with higher education and peer review and how Worldview distorts the way we review things. Yeah. That's kind of something we haven't talked much about before. Yeah. We could talk about all kinds of political situations where
voting records are being trounced.
People self-identify as things that are odd and unusual, not the normal stuff you might be thinking of. We can bring up stories, all kinds of
self-identifying as a 20-year-old,
20 years
younger.
It
could be anything. Yeah. Well, not like when your wife says, "Oh, I'm 29," and she's really not. Differently, yeah, but sort of like that actually. We could talk.
59 is the new 49. 49 is the new 39.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean,
I think atheist pastor, and let's get to see what else we get to after that.
All right, we'll probably get something else.
Atheist pastor is fascinating.
Yeah. And then academic integrity.
Yeah.
The peer review stuff.
Yeah, which gets to the peer review thing.
Huge.
Have some things. Yeah, well, maybe we'll get to that one next. So,
we'll
see what happens.
Let's talk about Leroy being a pastor here.
Okay, so there's an article that just came out November 10th. It's out of Canada.
Marine Corps birthday.
Title is After Coming Out as Atheist, Pastor Still Keeps Job. Now, this is not the first time this thing has come about. Right. I have actually something on my blog that is funny because it was ironically titled, I'm an atheist who believes in God, or something like that. And I'm a pastor who's an atheist who believes in God, was the title of my post. Okay. It was satirical.
Okay.
Basically, like, yes, I'm a pastor, but I'm an atheist, but I choose to believe in God.
Okay. Right.
And so it's just sort of like turning, and I wrote this whole thing, like a Babylon Bee-ish kind of thing, satirical. Right. Except you get people coming like, that doesn't make any sense, and yelling at me because it seemed like I was wrong for saying I could be those things. You're not a real atheist if you believe in God. I'm like, it's kind of the point, It's just, they didn't have a problem with the pastor being an atheist, just that if I was an atheist who said I believe in God, I was terrible. So anyway, so this is not new, but the story is interesting. So up in the United Church, which is a denomination in Canada, this minister, a female minister, Reverend Greta Vosper, they just settled against this quote-unquote heresy trial, as that was being billed, that was trying to remove her from her pastoral ministry because she said she was an atheist. And she'd been a vocal atheist apparently for quite some time. And the story says this. This controversy's been around. It says, the dance between these core values, how they interact with and inform each other, is one that we continue to explore as followers of Jesus and children of the Creator, he said. This is her lawyer talked about it. As a Christian church, we continue to expect that ministers of the United Church of Canada will offer their leadership in accordance with our shared and agreed upon statement of faith.
Mm-hmm.
So the denomination who basically settled this agreement, I should have taken it back. That's the lawyer for or one of the spokespersons for the denomination saying, hey, well, we agree that she can still, we're not going to make her leave, but we think that she can still lead based on the agreed upon statement of the faith that represents our denomination. That was their first statement. I thought was kind of interesting.
But what is their shared beliefs that she can promote if she's going to be an honest, unless you don't have to be honest.
Yeah.
See, if honesty and integrity are not in the equation, and because that's a moral issue, then you can just promote something and live differently.
I think it's in part because they assume that values and morals are not tied to theology. And theology is negotiable. Values and morals are not. So in other words, we can agree to care for one another and to help the homeless or to do whatever. We can still live that. We can still care. And
generic values.
Yeah, those values. We still do all those things. It doesn't matter if she denies the existence of God.
Right.
She can still live out the principles. Mm-hmm. Is what the but the church, the evangelical churches in the United States has done that forever. I think that's why we have so many problems that we have now. We've assumed that we've turned the Bible into a book of principles to follow, as opposed to a person of God. And so we our sermons. Here are these 5 happy hops to a better life. Do these 6 things and your life will be better. Here's the story of Jesus, healing somebody. Well, here's the basic principle that you can live by.
Happy hops?
Yeah, the 5 happy hops.
Like
that's
that.
Did you?
Oh,
I've used that one for years. That's
my
illustration.
Is it your go-to illustration?
That's my go-to.
All right.
The 5 happy hops to a better life. It's like,
I like that, happy hops.
It's like an Easter message.
It is. It sounds like it. Energizer Bunny.
Jesus died for us, but here's the 5 things you need to know to make your life better. The 5 happy hops, as it were. I don't know if I've actually ever heard that preached, but probably some stuff close to it. But see, we do that. We turn the stories don't have historic context. They don't have historic meaning. They just have meaning in what the principle how we apply it to ourselves. That's all that matters. So as long as we can agree about that principle, and I think that's what her point here is, so then it's okay. We don't have to share.
Principles in this way are more malleable than stated core values. In the way that they're describing it, or in the way that they're using it.
Yeah, explain that, because I'm thinking it's the opposite, in the way I'm thinking of it.
No, so I know what you're thinking. You're saying that principles, these are things that are non-negotiable.
Yeah, to them they're non-negotiable. The principles of care for the care for the hungry, that's a non-negotiable.
Right.
But Jesus being God, that's negotiable. Or the existence of God Himself, that's negotiable.
So that's what I'm saying. To them, they reverse the whole deal.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they reverse the whole.
As long as those core principles don't change their sinful desires, their life, their morality, it doesn't really change them. It's always like, okay, as long as you're nice to this person, unless they're an actual born again Christian.
Yeah.
But as long as you're nice and you're kind, it's external, it's measurable. I will judge or critique it based on that, not what you actually believe, not your heart. Not your desires, which is what, of course, Christ, of course, when he came, as you know, he upped the ante when it came to morality. He says, if you even looked at a woman with lust in your heart, you submit. If you think raka, if you think against
you idiot,
you idiot, you've committed murder. You've sinned against someone. You don't even have to carry it out. But for these people,
part of it is when you really consider. They don't have religious freedom in Canada the way that we do in America.
No, yeah,
it's
less.
For now. So when you think about what's going on here, the church is already lost by making the adoption that they made and allowing her, because as I think Joe read, she'd already been open with her views for a while. Mm-hmm. So they made this compromise with her very early on, and only later, because for whatever reason, I don't know that the article ever tells us why they chose to bring her deal to a head, so to speak. But they're in big trouble now, because even when they want to remove her, the cost for removing her is just too huge for the church to pay.
Yeah, unfortunately,
because they're going to have to pay legal. There's a chance that they may lose in court.
Mm-hmm.
and they'll pay legal fees, and then she'll be able to sue and get whatever money that she can get out of it, and then the church's doors will close because, I mean, here's a person that's not committed to the Word of God in the first place. I mean, why is she going to court if the church wants to remove her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she's not really committed to the Word of God in the first place or the long-term health of that church. She doesn't really care about that. She cares about her status and her position. That's really what our concern is. Or else she wouldn't have taken the church to court. She would have said, okay, since we can't resolve this, give me a severance package or whatever. I'll leave and go some other place. It's not what she chose to do.
Yeah.
She chose to take him to court because it's just a job. This is not a religious or, some...
Well, I'm sure in her argument, she's like, "Well, I'm still caring for these people."
Right.
I mean, that's
give her the
best
benefit of
face
the
on
doubt.
it,
Yeah.
give her the benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
In her view, she's like, "Well, I just want to care about these people I care about. I want to shepherd them and guide them.
Shepherd them into what?
I can still love them."
Right.
Well, that's the question.
Love them into what?
Well, let me read this next part. This is interesting. Get your thoughts on this because it takes a little different direction. But it says, Vosper, who's 60, who was ordained in 1993 and had served as a minister of West Hill United Church since 1997, has been upfront about her atheism and non-belief in the Bible for years. Most of her current congregations are supportive of her views, but some have been critical, saying her beliefs are at fundamental odds with the doctrine and values of the United Church of Canada's second largest religious denomination. Things came to a head after she wrote, now this is what brought all this incident on. Things came to a head after she wrote an open letter to the church's spiritual leader following the Charlie Hebdo massacre in Paris in January 2015, in which she pointed out that belief in God can motivate bad things. So basically, when in France, that guy went to the Charlie Hebdo reporters and, apparently she's tying that to belief in God, killed those reporters. She's saying, see, this is why I'm an atheist, because you people believe in God, that's producing bad things.
Right.
That's her view that created the thing. Now, I'll bring up this other story just as a relation. I don't want to get into the details of it. And this actually ties into some of the academic stuff later, but I'll bring it up just in relation to this. So her view, just so we understand, is really the common atheist view. Is being argued even in scientific papers. So there's a recent paper that came out through peer review, which I'll say that specifically because we'll talk about that maybe later if we get to it. And the question of this article that's challenging the science is, did artificial intelligence show that we are, quote, a peaceful species triggered by religion? Mm-hmm. So there's a peer-reviewed scientific article that went through, and this one I have in my hand has happened to argue showing why this is, where the philosophical flaws are. But essentially the argument for them is that our studies into artificial intelligence show us that humanity is really, by Darwinian evolution, peaceful. But it's only when you have religious thoughts that it deforms our peaceful nature and triggers us, or religion triggers us into violence. Which is essentially what this gal has argued. I mean, not in a scientific way, but in a philosophical way. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see the confluence of those things and why that, So in other words, in her view, hey, matter of fact, I'm healthier not believing in God leading this church, as opposed to you Christians who lead the church who actually believe in God. Right. That was her argument. And she's saying, no, we can all be at peace in the same values. It's just your values lead to violence, mine don't.
It's very
Think about the irony of that.
It's very interesting. Daniel Dennett gives a talk. And in his talk, he talks about an ant climbs up a blade of grass. And he goes to the very top of the blade of grass, and he knows that by going to the top of the blade of grass, he's going to get eaten by a sheep, because the ant is filled with a virus that wants to get inside of the sheep so it can actually kill the sheep. So the virus drives the ant to the top of the blade of grass to get eaten by the sheep, and it's eaten by the sheep so that it can infect and kill the sheep. He likens that virus to Christianity. Yeah. That is Daniel Dennett.
Yeah, one of the new atheists, the four horsemen of the
atheist apocalypse. And literally what he's saying is like this woman that religion is a disease that infects its host and drives it crazy.
Think about that.
Well, and on that, and she said because it triggered. Yeah. Triggered. Religion triggers. And at the same time, what has religion triggered? Hospices and hospital care, love, compassion, all kinds of things that come, of people who've gone overseas.
No. Those things would have been there anyway. More, they would have been there anyway.
They do it specifically
you can't
for
actually,
religion. Right. So if they ignore all evidence against their position, there is no evidence against their position.
Right.
Exactly.
But then you have
there you go.
But then you have atheists who who is it? The guy that cannibalized a bunch of victims. He was murdered in prison. Jeffrey Dahmer, and he appealed to Darwinian evolution. It's like, well, if there's no God, it doesn't matter. He said it's just there's Paul Blart.
Well,
Stalin.
The long-term ramifications of this is her view. Her view. If we're putting the best spin on her view does not necessarily lead to genocide and atrocities, but her view does not militate against it either. It allows for genocide and atrocities and ultimately doesn't say that they're wrong. Because on her view, she cannot muster a moral framework by which to say that anything is right or wrong.
But she can say belief in God is wrong. I mean,
that's not morally wrong.
Not in truth she can,
right.
But that is her argument.
That's her argument.
That's what I find so ironic about this.
It's fallacious.
The whole lawsuit comes out and they come to an agreement, and the guy representing the denomination says, hey, we can all still get along. We all still have the same values. But the thing that sparked this whole thing is her saying, no, we can't all get along because you people that believe in God, you're the problem that's causing violence.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's my view, which rejects God, that leads to a better, peaceful life.
Right.
So now that she's condemned that, the Christians, to get along, say, well, we can all just get along anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But you're getting along with somebody who's inherently saying, no, we can't all get along. Your view is wrong.
Right.
For the Christian to say your view is wrong is prejudiced and all those other isms that it becomes. But her view is
that getting along that she appeals to is actually a biblical concept, where it says in Romans, says if it's as far as up to you, get along, be at peace with all people.
Yeah,
that's what it actually says. So anyway, but you're right. She's promoting it, and she can't sustain it. There's no basis for her to sustain it.
There's none.
Why get along? Why should we?
Yeah.
And the reason why it can't sustain it, because it makes no positive or negative statements about morality per se.
No, there's no grounding for it.
There's no grounding for it.
So it makes a statement, but it doesn't have a grounding.
Well, it's not what I'm saying is the belief, not the individual. The belief can't say anything about morality because it has no grounding, as you said. But the individual can make whatever statements that they want, and those statements will be either true or false. But the belief itself can't. It's just a different category. It's a different category, and it can't allow for morality. Otherwise, because to argue for a moral framework, you have to argue for some kind of moral law. And if you're going to argue for some moral law, you have to argue for some moral lawgiver. Yeah. And that defeats the kind of thing that you really want that you're arguing for in the first place.
Ipso facto, you're an objective moralist, and they typically reject objective morality for themselves. They only apply it to religion.
Right.
Yeah. So
it's a canard.
So that's therein lies. You mentioned Romans 12. The idea is so far as in any of you to live at peace with one another, it's within your power to live at peace. Right. Paul's making that argument in Romans 12, but there's where example of principalizing something, not you, but just in general. You can take and say, hey, live at peace. This is what the Bible teaches. Live at peace.
The golden rule.
But it doesn't teach live at peace with one another. It teaches that because Paul's speaking there to the church, people in the church that are fighting with each other. And it does apply outside, but what he's essentially saying, if the whole flow is that because Christ has redeemed you, because you've been brought out of the world, because you have been saved and sanctified, therefore you should and need to live at peace with those and others. I mean, the foundation
living at peace is the outworking of the other thing.
It's the outworking of a relationship with Christ.
Right.
She denies there is a Christ.
Right.
So you can't take the principle of live at peace. It's not sustainable on its own.
Right.
Which is what you both just argued in a more philosophic sense, but just in a theological sense, Paul isn't saying that out of the blue because it's a good principle to live by.
And that's where people
He's
make
saying
the
it's
mistake.
Inherent to the nature of who God is and who we are in Christ, that we must therefore live this way. They get rid of everything before the therefore and just assume it will self-sustain, and it doesn't.
Right.
That's the real problem.
And that's her view. Her view is, these principles, and that's the kind of view that you would expect an atheist to hold who wants to lead a church.
Yeah.
but they would be arguing for principles and maxims and good and wise sayings, aphorisms and what are they called? What starts with an E? Epigrams and all these good and nice sayings. That's really what they want to forward. That's the old, not Henry White. What's the old preacher that's got three names?
Well,
I remember. He's an old preacher with three names who just is all, wise sayings. That's his whole.
Norman Vincent Peale.
I was thinking Norman Vincent Peale, but it's another one.
Oswald Chambers?
No, Oswald. No, he's not that guy. He's got a little
Norman Vincent Peale did popularize that whole thing. Last quote I'll do from this. I think it's instrumental in terms of what good is theology.
Mm-hmm.
What was the purpose of theology?
Mm-hmm.
So it says here that originally the denomination had said, well, hey, she can't be a minister in the church because, quote, she does not believe in God, Jesus Christ, or the Holy Spirit, or the Bible, authoritatively. That's what the original ruling was. Her lawyer for this female pastor gal at the church, says both parties took a long look at the cost benefit at running the heresy trial, which is what she said. The financial
money.
We're going to cost you some serious money if you try to do this. So you're like, yeah, they. But anyway, said, quote, they recognize there is a place for Greta, and that there is no reason to separate the minister and the congregation. So as long as the minister's happy, and as long as some of the congregation's happy, certainly belief in God or Jesus or the Bible or the Holy Spirit, those are just trifles.
Those are tertiary
issues.
Those
are trifling issues. We should not
we
cannot worry about those things. But sadly, I think
bunny hop around this issue.
Yeah, but I mean, do you guys agree? I mean, it makes sense though that I think a large part we look at that. It's easy to critique that how silly it is. But there is so much of the church in our sphere, in what would be evangelical circles, Protestant circles, that I think treat theology that same way. Where we don't think it matters to believe what your view of Christ or the Trinity or all these sort of
it's
things.
It's a very interesting. We go to a lot of events, and a lot of events are at churches who host a lot of these events. And whenever we're at churches, we seldom get people who come to our table. And in talking to people, I've come to a general idea. People think it's because they have the Bible and they can read it themselves. They know exactly what it says. Do you see what I'm saying? And there's no deeper or further there. Do you catch what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You couple that with the fact that, like you talked about, many sermons, not all sermons, but many sermons are the 5 happy hops to salvation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
That's a lot easier than the complex theology.
That's a lot easier than wrapping your head around some of these really difficult issues. So what you end up doing is there's what do they say? A mist in the pew, a mist in the pulpit, and a fog in the seats.
Yeah.
And there's no real clarity there. There's no real clarity about what needs to be learned there.
It's what I'll call a hermeneutical narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
I applied it to my life already.
Yeah.
I know what it says enough to make my life better right now. I'm happier. Why would I need something deeper?
Right.
Because I've already made my life better by following these principles.
Mm-hmm.
So their hermeneutic is all about making self satisfied in some way. And pastors are fine with that because it's easier to draw a crowd than take a controversial or potentially difficult issue. And we all know the gospel is a stumbling block to many, the truth of the gospel. So I think therein lies part of the problem. That and we've professionalized seminary education to the point. The point is you want to become a professional minister, not an informed laity. If you I don't like that distinction, but in those categories.
And there's a danger there. There's a danger there for both the seminary and the church.
Oh, yeah.
The danger is that when difficult things happen, and the church should have a rightful connection with seminary people who can help them think through and wrestle through some of these deeper things. The church benefits from those folks who studied these things a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And
the seminaries remain vital because they are constantly being fed by the church. So there's a natural relationship with both. Well, in our churches today, and I think this is more evident here in Southern California, I call it the holy man model. The holy man model is, once I learn enough that I can answer some of the basic questions, I've got church all down, and I'm fit to be a pastor.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Once I've learned enough. And
yeah, you only have to be, if everybody's here, I only have to be just a little
bit
here,
above. Exactly.
and then I'm good.
That's
I'm
exactly
set
right.
for the rest of my life.
That's exactly right. And there's a danger, again, there's a danger in that because, you know, these guys and gals who've gone before us, they've left us a bounty of information in their writings and a lot of deep thinking about the church and Christianity and Christ. And my fear is this, and I'll leave it at this. I know we're in a transition. My fear is this: that when it comes to some of these difficult issues, you need people who understand both sides. You know, it's not just two competing pastors' voices. They understand, they're theologians. They understand how these pastors have formed their opinions and what they base their opinions on, are able to evaluate their opinions and say, "Oh, this is right and that's wrong." Mm. And the average person in the pulpit thinks that they're able to do that. And unfortunately, they're absolutely not able to do that. They can't because they don't have...
Guys, we got a comment on Facebook.
Your wife. She says, I'm watching live. My piano lesson was rescheduled.
Welcome, wife.
All right.
They don't possess the ability to differentiate between those two opinions. And they've cut themselves off from the people who can differentiate them between those two opinions. And ultimately, it's a loss for everybody.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well,
which is pride. And the driving factor there is pride, and not humility for us. So.
Well, and that's definitely true. I don't disagree, but I'll refocus it a little bit only to make this transition.
For your narcissistic
yes, exactly. No, it's like you ever watch the news. My favorite thing about the news, and today, it's been raining cats and dogs or whatever. Some of the weatherman goes, and the anchor pulls it back. Speaking of rain, we have a tragic story of death today.
Yes.
It's like, wait, that has no connection. It's like,
what?
But they just say it as if there's a connection. So speaking of pride, there was a story today.
or they'll just report on 12 people massicared. But on another note,
that's tragic.
There's a sun coming tomorrow, and there's a parade.
Yeah,
Speaking of tragic massacre, the weather today was,
That's exactly how they do that. And it is literally how they do it on the news. That's the unfortunate thing. We're not joking. That's actually how they do it.
But, so one of the ways I'll reframe that is I think pride is an issue, but also we assume that when we have a certain view, our worldview that shapes the way we interpret stuff around us. Once we feel comfortable with that, we self-select what information we want to bring in or what's valuable to us because we don't want anything to disrupt that. We don't want to create, a disequilibrium in our minds. We want to just we don't want any, in the psychological terms, cognitive dissonance, stuff to make us go wonky.
Are you talking about husband's ears?
Yeah.
Husband hearing?
Wow.
Or when...
Don't try to appeal to my wife.
Wow. William Lane Craig calls it...
if my wife wasn't watching, you'd be like, oh, you talking about wife yesterday? I know what you'd say.
William Lane Craig calls it travelers and balconeers. Travelers and balconeers. He says when you're talking to people...
Oh, like people in the balcony.
When you're talking to people, you want to always be talking to travelers. Travelers, these are people who are moving in life, and they're willing to listen to what you have to say. He said the people in the balcony, they're the ones who have a skeptical dial. And he says everybody to some degree has a skeptical dial. But the people in the balcony have their skeptical dials turned up so high that nothing that you can say... he probably borrowed that from one of those.
I think it was Chesterton or Lewis.
He said, but their dials are up so high that nothing you can say can overcome their skepticism. Yeah. And he said, and our problem might be that our dials are down so low that we just accept everything that agrees with our position.
Yeah, and so we have that in the church, and I think that illustrates partly there. But I read an article today that deals with that issue in academic circles.
Good transition.
Speaking of that,
your wife noted, this is why you're so good at transitions.
I know, right? Yeah. I can transition all the topics. When she wants to talk about one thing, I transition to another thing. And it's seamless. She doesn't even know.
That is so funny. Yeah, I don't get it.
But so I read in this, it's actually the San Diego Tribune, which was really interesting because the premise of the article was this. There was a study that came out from a couple researchers I think it was out of I actually don't have it printed for some reason. So one of the Ivy League schools, and they had basically put out on global warming that their studies showed that the oceans were more rapidly increasing in the temperature than had ever been predicted, and this was just earth-shaking, earth-shattering, literally knowledge that this study proves that all this is happening. And so it got picked up in the newspapers, and other people were just promoting this. Well, some guy who's a skeptic picks it up, and he said literally page 1 of this study, he finds an error in the basic math, the mathematical assumptions in this. And so within a couple minutes, that's all it took him. First page, within a couple minutes, he's able to show that all of their conclusions are completely fallacious.
Mm-hmm.
Because the numbers don't show anything what they say they show, because they made some basic assumptions that were wrong in the math.
They weren't just questionable. They were wrong.
No, it was wrong.
Yeah.
Because so all the authors have to say, oh, this is wonderful. Thank you for pointing this out. We're going to rewrite and submit to the Nature, I think was the magazine that published. And
Nature? They published in Nature?
I think it was Nature or some Scientific American or something
right.
like that.
It was a big.
It was a serious peer-reviewed study that they published. And they said, oh, this is what, the academics is all about, just this critique and making it better. And they just totally played it off like, oh, we're just so grateful that this got corrected. Because in the end, the new numbers show that their research proved nothing. That's not outside statistical norms or expectations. It's basically, meh. It's just boring. But it's not as exciting as their original one that they had in the bad math. But they played it off like this is just part of the process. But what they didn't really acknowledge is, how does it get through peer review? How does an article with basic mathematical...
Is this in the San Diego Tribune?
Yeah. This is
this, like this part you're
This
pointing
article
out.
was in the San Diego... No, they don't point out that. They
That's
just say,
crazy.
oh, the authors acknowledge it, and this is just what science does, and we're always refining. And they just sort of played it off. I was just shocked that they pointed out that this article had an error. But what the article did not say is this point, is that, think about this. It goes through a peer review process where other scientists are supposed to look through and look at the fundamentals of this research and say, yes, this is a valid case. Mm-hmm. But not one of them could look at a basic error in mathematics.
Or catch it.
And I would argue that in part because they didn't want to catch it. They just assume the answer must be right because it fits with their worldview. Right. They're not really looking for errors. They're just looking for, basic mistakes. Oh, okay, you want to fix this. They're looking for confirmation bias of what they already believe. And that's the challenge in a lot of academics, and that's where
we can do that in our theology too.
Yeah, exactly. The transition. Yeah.
I was telling someone. I think I was telling you at lunch. We in an exercise that we just completed. It really dawned on me, and really powerfully, that the exegetical fallacies that we make, particularly in theology, they don't spring up from the text. Generally, they come from us and our misreading or some other commitment that we have.
The biblical text isn't making an exegetical fallacy.
It says what it says.
Right. Exactly.
They spring up from the individual. So the individual may have something that prevents them from arriving at a proper conclusion, some belief that they have that they don't want to be true. And that's a very, very powerful motivator for not arriving at the truth in some situations. And sometimes we have to ask ourselves, what are this person's pre-commitments? What is this person committed to? Even in the journal you're talking about, this is a peer-reviewed journal. They're supposed to look at the mathematics. That's part of what they do.
Science.
That's part of what they do.
It's science research, and that's the
so if the mathematics is wrong, then there's no fundamental value to the conclusions that they draw.
Exactly.
There's no value whatsoever.
Yeah.
And you have to say, that should have been the end of the article.
Yeah.
They were wrong. Go back to the drawing board and get us some proper conclusions.
Yeah. But they didn't, because it again agrees with that. Now this is another interesting one, because this is not a Christian thing. This is actually coming out of Scientific American. Another
that's a good one.
I think and so the title of this is called "Seeking Truth When the Consensus is Against You."
Mm-hmm.
And the subtitle is, "You should always listen to the experts, except when you shouldn't."
Wow.
Yeah, but it's really interesting.
How not profound.
I won't get into any of the granular detail of this because it gets into a lot of the weeds. Because this is a basic guy who's a physicist who is talking about his research into black holes and what creates black holes and the energy and just a lot of details about theories surrounding what makes a black hole. And he gives two examples of where he had basically been at these scientific conferences and made specific proposals about gravitational potentials at one, and then another related to gravitational issues and black holes and how they're formed and how they deal with gravity, all kinds of good stuff. So he goes to these conferences and he proposes these ideas, and he's just laughed at and scoffed at. Oh, what a ridiculous, stupid idea! So he comes back to where he's at in his Ivy League school. I think in Harvard he comes back specifically, and he recommends one of his ideas to a professor and some research students researching stuff. And so students have nothing to lose, so they start researching stuff. And pretty soon, his first idea gets tested out, and then it gets empirically sort of, there's validity to this. And then it moves on to become a published paper that's accepted and, against all the odds because these people found, this is actually good. And then he goes on to give a couple circumstances just like that. And he makes it analogous to Galileo. Mm-hmm. And how when Galileo had his original ideas that they were sort of dismissed. A lot of times it's assumed by religious people, by the Roman Catholics, but there was actually more science on the side against Galileo.
Oh yeah, it actually wasn't there.
Yeah, he had no scientific foundation for it. It was just an alternative theory that really didn't have any empirical validation to it. Mm-hmm. So it was really a new scientific theory competing against an existing well-established scientific theory. And the inferior theory, what was considered, the non-consensus view, was all automatically dismissed.
Right.
And so that's his idea of here, is seeking truth when the consensus gets you, and just how you have to sometimes persevere and find evidence and do all those sort of things, even when it's not there. And so I think that that's the challenge, even in theology, is how do we pursue ideas that are now no longer in favor theologically, but through the peer review process, because people have their worldview and their bias, they're just not letting stuff through.
Right. I talked to someone who publishes a few papers, and I don't know anything about publishing papers. I mean, I've talked to people who do it, or at least attempt to do it, and I was just amazed that depending on the journal that you submit to, that journal may have a particular view or interest, and they will not receive your paper if it is against that view or interest.
If it's against their interest, they will not publish it. They won't publish it and then say, let's do response articles. So that's always been my thought, the expectation. So you print an article, and then if there's bad things, you get somebody to write a response article, and then you have this academic debate through papers that takes place. That doesn't seem to happen as much in journals. I submitted to one particular journal, and I had one guy said, yes, publish. One guy that was like vehement, no, this is not even meets our standard, nowhere near it. So there's two different people, same peer review. One says, yeah, that's great. The other guy said, no, we cannot have this. This is melodious. Not melodious, but malodious.
Malodious, M-A-L.
And then they added a third guy, so I went to the third guy, and he was sort of agnostic, like, yeah, we could probably publish this. And the general editor said, well, no, because the one guy who was really adamant against it, he had sort of the political clout. You could tell by the way, the exchanges we had. But his whole critique of everything, they had like 3 other critiques. None of them had to do with the substance of what I said. He just disagreed. I mean, because he sent me the peer review comments. So I said, hey, can I just see that? I'd like to see what I could do better. And it was, once it's like, you're just, because I was actually dealing with this Galileo issue, and I was fairly upfront about that. There isn't a religious bias against science. So even when the Roman Catholics were, many were opposed, there were many in favor of Galileo. But it was just because of the political circumstances at the time, the leadership was saying, no, we can't accept this.
Right.
Because they were already weakened by, the split that had happened with the church in the East and West just a few, 150, 200 years before, whatever it was, within a couple centuries. And so they were already kind of licking their political wounds and they couldn't take another hit to their authority.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't a Roman Catholic problem. It was a leadership problem. And that's essentially what I was pointing out in this argument, which is not radical concept. I mean, I had footnotes, all this stuff, but this guy said, this is a clear, attack on Roman Catholicism, and, you can't sustain this. And, but that was the substance of his rejection.
He saw it as a threat.
Yeah, he saw it as a threat.
Not, he didn't evaluate it based on...
The other thing he dinged me on this one, he said, I had said that one of the... Because I was actually discussing about the need for sort of a heuristic critique of skepticism about global warming. Not skepticism as in it can exist, but heuristic in the sense of let's explore, but let's be critical in that exploration and do it. And so one of the application points was that in our science, we need to be more open about our research and the peer review process. And his actual comments, this guy clearly understands nothing about science and then the peer review process and how it's done. I'm like, I would challenge you with my science degree versus yours, and I bet you don't even have one. Mm-hmm. And secondly, I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm saying there just needs to be more. And I cited an article when I did that was a peer-reviewed article that made that same argument. And I can tell you, since that article came out, there have been 2 conferences in the UK on this very issue.
Yeah.
The need for academic openness and integrity in the peer review process and in scientific, especially in scientific education. So there have been 2 major conferences in the UK about that very issue. But because he was biased, my article was no good.
We talked about this in a previous episode where a group of people, I think it was 3 people, who put together a bunch of crazy papers and submitted them.
And got 12 papers.
And got them all through peer review and accepted.
Oh, a few of them, yeah, they did. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think 7 of the 12 or
7
like
of
that,
them.
or 7 of 11.
And the reason why, no matter how outlandish the science was, because the conclusions were right.
Yes.
They were able to be...
You said the right thing.
They were accepted.
Yeah, that's right.
Said them the right way. Reinforce the worldview, therefore it's okay. I'm not going to look... And that's what we see in the science stuff. That's what we see in theology. So it's not that Christianity is immune from this. And I think that's what we argue for a lot in here, why we're doing what we're doing, is that people as believers and just average people in the pew, hey, I don't need it. Whatever your thinking is, this applies because we can all create those worldview biases that make us, that insulate us and isolate us from all critical thought, which makes us really ill-equipped to respond to the cultural shifts and the challenges of the church are facing.
I think that's a very interesting point. I listened to a talk over the weekend from Jay Richards and Jim Wallace, and their talk was on poverty. Right? It's just they were both giving this talk. Jay Richards, gives this logically precise and concise argument to help you think about poverty and economics and inequality. Jim Wallace, the whole time, just appeals to emotion, so much so that every time he started talking, I just wanted to just kill myself.
Oh gosh, that's bad.
I wanted to shoot myself.
By the way, this is not an endorsement of
no, it's not at all.
Life issues.
But what bugged me about it was, one was respecting the topic.
Yeah.
The other one was doing violence to the topic because he had an agenda. And he would and ultimately he got undressed as the discussion went along. But the point being is he's there to give a set of facts about a question that people have. That's what our papers are. They're our research into a set of facts about a research question. And when that research is done well, we hope at the end of it, it says something about the world that people can do something with and make some changes on and affect, either how we do theology or how we think about theology or understanding of the scriptures. We want to add something to the world. And all peer review is supposed to do is to say, yes, you've done... You've shown the claim, proved the claim.
You've demonstrated academically that you've gone through it, it's rigorous, whatever. I may not agree with it, but it's there.
But it's there.
And it's substantive enough to throw it in the pot of being...
Of ideas.
Of ideas. Absolutely not. It's not like a flat earth theory. of thing.
Yeah.
It has to be something.
And it's not supposed to be the final answer. Like you were right. Oh,
Right,
no,
right,
but
right.
it's but
It's a
all they're
viable
saying is they're
option.
reviewing and saying
One way or
this
another.
person has done
Due
the
diligence.
due diligence. He's done the work,
Yeah.
and you should give him a hearing.
Yeah.
But they're not doing that.
Yeah.
They're saying, "Oh, you've done the work, and you should have a hearing, but because we don't agree with you,
Yeah.
you shall not be heard."
Yeah.
Right.
And
That's
that
the-
and you don't expect that in religious circles. You don't expect it there.
Let
You
me
don't
ask you guys
expect
this question, because I don't know that there's a connection here or not, but let me know what you think. I just saw a gentleman, a professor out here in California.
I have a meeting at 3.
Okay. So we'll close up, but maybe we'll discuss this otherwise. So, because I knew you had that coming up. But he asked, with all this education we get today and all the discipleship training and courses, why does it seem like there's fewer and fewer disciples? People that are actually effectively
That's a
walking.
whole show.
But I wonder how much of what we're talking about here, do you think the issue we're discussing here about, that sort of worldview bias and stuff, do you think that is a factor in why our theological training and our discipleship education doesn't work? And do you think, in other words, the people come into the discipleship process with an idea
Yes.
of what they want their life to look like, and so they just dismiss anything? I mean, no matter how
They-
good the education. In other
They've
words,
been taught to think that
They've
way.
been taught to think that
They've
way,
been
and
taught
I
to think-
agree. I was aiming at that. I agree. They've been taught to think that way because and I'm not. Again, I hate. I
That's a whole
don't,
show.
I don't want to jump on the pastors. It's not my
Okay.
goal. But
Yeah.
but it's what we hear in the pulpits that lead us to the fact that there's nothing deeper. There's no more deeper place to go to.
I know words are offended at that, and you should just leave right now.
I would. Fine.
That's ridiculous that he would even say that. Because
We'll
I
do
noticed he interrupted me there. And you didn't get
Gotta go.
Try to interrupt.
He has a meeting.
No,
We're
I
going to
have
be
a
closing
meeting.
up in a minute here.
I tried
God
Thank you, man.
bless.
Try to interrupt you.
We may not be
No,
back
no.
next week, so
No.
we'll be in touch.
All playing. We can talk about it maybe next week.
Yeah,
I gotta run.
absolutely.
All right, take care. You guys.
That's why we're off the cuff.
But that's true.
So, yeah, it just made me think. I think that there could be something to that, because it doesn't matter how great. We keep thinking it's a problem with the curriculum of our discipleship.
isn't.
We keep thinking it's a problem with the way we do theology.
It
So we
isn't.
keep reinventing a new program,
Right.
this new program, and that new
Right.
program. But how much of it is, and we won't unpack it now, but how much of it is that bias that says, I have already figured out the way to do life.
Right.
I just need to learn some of the principles that you can give me that fit within my system, but I'm not looking to redo the whole thing.
I'm going to tell you. I think that this is a good question. I mean, it really is. There's a number of issues at work here. One of the issues at work here, again, is the pulpit doesn't lend itself to anything deeper than a particular pastor. I mean, there have been pastors who I've heard say that people get all their discipleship from the pulpit. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean that's a kind of insane thought that you once a week for 45 minutes are going to disciple people. That isn't how that works. It just isn't.
Yeah.
And the second thing is we're I mean, let's be real. We're all too worldly.
Yeah.
I mean, we're too attached to this world. I mean, Jesus' statement, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? That is a very, very fascinating statement. I mean, why would Jesus say that? He's already said that that the world will not prevail against the church, right?
Yeah.
The church will remain. But then he says, when he comes, will he find faith? I just
That's
think,
a question we'll answer next week. No.
no, it's true though.
But
It's
no,
something to
that's
think
good.
about.
I think we will. We probably do need to wrap up, but I think that we might have to try to get back to this. Influence on a lot of stuff we talk about between these worldviews and ideas, and how it's sort of hamstrung our discipleship process.
I think that's a
Because
great
I think we
great
keep trying to
topic.
reinvent the wheel.
That's a great topic.
And people aren't looking for a wheel.
No.
It's like, here's another wheel. No, I don't want a wheel.
No.
But here's a better wheel. I said, well,
I'm going to tell you, there can be no substitute if you want to see people disciple from people. The number one key I would say is humility, being able to let yourself be led by someone. That is the number one key for discipleship, humility. And that's a big thing that's missing. And the second thing is you need to have people who are willing to travail with people and be patient with people. And that's a trait that is lacking.
Yeah, for sure. My wife says, great perspective on discipleship, Leroy. You're so wise. Well, she didn't say that you're so wise, but
Well,
I'm
she-
mad at that because I know
yeah.
that's what she really meant too.
Yeah, yeah.
So, all right. Well, we are done.
Maybe we'll
for
talk
this
about
week.
it in a couple weeks.
Yeah, in a couple weeks. We're off for Thanksgiving. Most likely, I don't think we'll be on next week. We'll be back.
We
in
won't
a
be
couple
here on
weeks.
Wednesday yet, so we'll be gone.
Yeah, and then we'll probably end up being a little bit inconsistent over December because of the Christmas holidays and then New
Although
Year's
we
stuff.
can just
So we'll
Periscope
see.
it without Ward. I mean,
Yeah, we can always do it.
We don't need Ward.
Yeah,
We just drop Ward.
Yeah,
Just
so-
let him go. Like
drop
Corey,
them like
this
a
is
sack of potatoes.
this is like a box of hot rocks.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, we might have to do that. All right. Well,
All right, it's good to see you.
blessings all.